The first rock shattered before she even turned around. It hit the edge of the porch railing, split in two, and rolled down the step into the snow like it had been dropped by a careless child. But she knew better. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look. Not yet. It wasn't the first time. The second one struck her cabin window directly. The clean ping of glass told her exactly what had happened before the laughter followed. Thin, taunting, the kind that meant she was being watched by more than one man. That laughter didn't bother her much anymore. But the glass, that did, not because it had cracked. She'd braced it with a second pane, and the outer one had taken the hit. No, what made her jaw clench was that the men still didn't understand it, or didn't want to. And that ignorance, that scorn, was the one thing she couldn't insulate herself against. Her name was Clara Dellinger, born Clara Wilkes of Topeka, Kansas, 27 years old and already on her second marriage, if that's what one could call it. The first ended quiet. He'd never come home from his delivery run west. They said horse tracks scattered in every direction, likely Apaches, possibly bandits, but either way she never saw Henry again. She hadn't waited long before answering a mail order ad from a trapper named Saul Dellinger, a man she'd never met, who wanted a wife to help keep the roof from falling in and the heart from freezing up. It wasn't poetic, it was practical. Clara had always respected that. But Saul had died of fever just 5 weeks after she'd stepped off the coach into the snow-drifted hell of that Montana December, leaving her with a half-rotted cabin, no neighbors for 4 miles, and a burial mound that never stayed smooth because the wolves came sniffing. And yet, Clara stayed. That first winter near killed her. The second taught her more than she ever wanted to know about firewood, wet rot, and the way heat escapes a home like a man fleeing from trouble. And by the third, she'd started making changes the other settlers called insane, ridiculous, and even worse, feminine. Because what kind of woman builds a glass wall on the south side of a cabin? It wasn't just glass. That's what they never understood. It was old salvaged windows from a mining town 40 miles south, carefully hauled in on a sled she'd dragged herself through early spring melt. She'd framed them in with care, laid thick clay mortar between the joins, and placed blackened stones beneath, angled to trap the sun. But they didn't ask. They just laughed. And when the snow came down harder than anyone remembered, when the rivers froze so deep you could strike them with a pickaxe and still not hear a crack, they kept laughing until their own stoves burned out and their own walls sweated frost, until their children began coughing in their sleep. That morning, the third rock didn't hit the cabin. It hit the dirt near her boot. Clara turned, slow. 3 figures stood on the ridge. Lance McGraw, his brother Ruel, and that bitter wretch Ellis, with the crooked leg, who'd once tried to trade her a broken saw for fresh bread. Their eyes were meaner now, and colder. The storm had taken more than wood from them. It had taken dignity. "You gonna share that fancy sunlight of yours, Mrs. Glass Lady?" Ellis shouted, arms spread like a preacher calling fire from the sky. Clara didn't answer. She didn't even blink. She just turned back toward the cabin, where warmth still wrapped the inside like a quilt, even though her fire had gone out 4 hours ago, because the heat wasn't coming from the stove. It was coming from the sun, trapped and stored and slow-released, like the heat of a stone pulled from a long-dead campfire. Inside, she shut the door and braced it, not against men, but against the cold they brought with them, the cold of fear, of desperation. Then she walked past the narrow kitchen, past the hearth, and into the main room where the glass wall caught the rising sun in full. The cabin had once been a darkness pit, logs blackened with soot and sadness. Now it glowed, and when she stepped into the warmth of that sunlit pool, her fingers prickled from the contrast, the chill outside against the radiant heat within, and still they thought she was mad. 3 days later, a blizzard rolled in from the pass, with a voice like iron screaming against the earth. The sky turned white. The sun vanished for nearly a week. Temperatures dropped to depths no one was ready for, not even those who thought they'd seen it all. But Clara's cabin held firm, held warm, because she had a secret, one more thing beyond the glass wall, something even Saul never knew she'd planned to build. And it wasn't glass. It was deeper. It was buried. And it was why she slept through that storm while others burned through every last log they owned, and then tore floorboards from their own homes just to keep a flame going. They would come again, not with rocks this time, but with empty eyes and shaking hands. Some would beg, some might take, but none of them had believed her, and that's what made it so hard to forgive. The first knock came just before dawn, barely audible through the drift of snow packing up against the door. Not a pounding, not a rattle, just the soft kind of tap that told you someone's hand was too cold to knock any harder. Clara opened her eyes without moving. She knew that knock, not who it belonged to, but what it meant. It meant someone out there had no other place left, not that they'd admit it, not yet. She didn't answer. She lay in the warmth of her blanket, the thick hide she'd spent 3 weeks sewing from the last elk Saul had dragged in before the fever took him. She felt no pride in that thought, only a distant dullness, like the pain had frozen over and just wouldn't thaw. The cabin was still warm, no fire burning. The stove was empty, the hearth nothing but ash and ember memory, but the warmth remained. It soaked up from the thick flagstone floor she'd laid herself, interlaced with stones black as pitch that drank sunlight by day and gave it back slow as breath by night. That floor was her second secret, the one no one had asked about because they never came inside. They'd only seen the glass and decided she was a fool. Clara rose and stepped barefoot onto that sun-warmed stone. Even after 6 hours of black sky and falling snow, the warmth lingered. Not hot, never hot, but never bitter, just enough to not shiver, just enough that her lips didn't chap in the night and her fingers didn't curl stiff. Another knock, louder this time. Still she didn't answer. She dressed slow, woolen skirt, shawl over her shoulders, a band of thick cloth to pull her hair back. It was still dark, the sky outside smothered in a white haze that turned morning into memory. She opened the door. It was Ellis, but not the Ellis she remembered. No coat, just 2 shirts and a wool blanket clutched around his shoulders like he'd ripped it from a child's bed. His skin was grey, not from frostbite, not yet, but the color people got when they were 3 days past, enough food, and 1 day into begging. He didn't say her name, didn't greet her, didn't even meet her eyes, just stood there, fists trembling around that scrap of cloth. Clara looked behind him. No one else, just tracks in the snow. "You alone?" she asked. He nodded, barely. His jaw wouldn't quite open all the way. His lips were cracked at the corners, and she could see the faint glaze of ice around the stubble on his cheek. She stepped aside. He entered like a dog who didn't know if it was being let in or lured in. For a moment he stood near the door, letting the warmth hit him. His knees almost gave out from the difference. "I don't need much," he said finally. Just a place to sit. Clara handed him a warm stone wrapped in burlap. She'd kept them near the hearth wall for nights like this, stones that soaked in heat and gave it out for hours. He clutched it like a heart. She made no tea, no stew, not yet. She just watched him, and when he started to cry, she turned away to give him the dignity of doing it in silence. He stayed 2 days, never asked questions, never talked about what happened to the others, because he didn't have to. Clara knew. She saw the way his fingers shook even when warm, the way he flinched at every creak of the wind, like it was the snap of a frozen branch falling, the way his eyes kept darting to the glass wall like it was unnatural. He left without warning, early the 3rd morning, but when she went outside an hour later, there was something left on the step. 2 rabbits, not skinned, not cleaned, but fresh, caught, probably the last he had, and beside them, a small tin of coffee so rusted through she'd assumed it was empty, until she heard the soft shake of the grounds. Inside. Ellis never came back, but others did. They came alone, in pairs. By the end of the 2nd week of the storm, a family of 6 stood at her door, their wagon half covered in drift, the mother holding a newborn against her chest with cloth so thin Clara's eyes burned just to see it. And that was the first time Clara hesitated. Because she had food, she had warmth, but not enough. She let them in anyway. There were too many for the bunks. She spread the children out across the stone floor, warmed with bricks and a wool rug Saul's mother had sent her years ago, and which she'd nearly burned twice, but never quite could. She rationed the broth. She thinned the flour with cornmeal. She soaked beans every morning and boiled them over a tiny fire just long enough to soften them, then buried the pot in a chest filled with hay to let the heat finish the job slow and silent. That was her 3rd secret. Not just the stone floor, not just the glass wall, but the timing, how heat moved, how it could be caught and held, not just made. That was what none of the others had understood. They saw fire as a thing you lit and fed and watched die. She saw it like a loan, like sunlight could be borrowed and paid back at night if you knew where to hide it. The nights kept getting colder, but Clara's cabin didn't. Word spread, not across the town, not in open talk, but like whispers between trees. The same way wolves signal without sound, a glance, a nod, the way the wind moved around a body when another one's just been buried. They didn't laugh anymore. Now they watched her, resented the glow behind her glass, but didn't understand it, until the man in the red scarf came. She didn't see him arrive. One morning he was just there, standing out beyond the tree line, hat low, arms folded, eyes hidden cabin beneath the brim. He never approached, just watched, stayed there long after sunset. The scarf twisted in the wind like a flame that wouldn't burn out. She watched him from behind the glass, never let herself look long. Something about him made her bones tighten. The next morning, he was gone, but the tracks weren't. They circled the cabin twice. She didn't sleep that night, and the next day, she packed what food she could into bundles. Not for escape, but for survival. She wasn't leaving. She couldn't. Not now. There were 9 people under her roof, 3 of them children, one of them sick. Clara had nursed the boy's fever through 2 nights with hot stones and herb-soaked cloth, and now the cough was loosening, but just barely. She couldn't risk anyone else coming, but they would. Not with begging, with fire. She knew how these winters ended. Men didn't die quietly. They died taking things, so she prepared. She sealed the door with a second layer of bark and mud, reinforced the windows with extra cloth by night, laid heavy bricks near the chimney flue in case she had to kill the draft without killing the warmth. And still, she waited for the red scarf, or worse. She didn't know what scared her more, his face, or the thought that she might never see it. Because men who watched that long without speaking didn't want food. They wanted something else. And if he came back, there might not be enough warmth in the world to stop what followed. The wind had shifted. Clara knew it before she opened her eyes, before her fingers touched the chilled air beside the blanket seam. It wasn't a drop in temperature. Those came hard and sudden. No, this was the slow sort of turn, the kind a trapper or a widow with too many scars could feel in their joints, their breath, the timbre of silence between snowflakes. Something was coming. Not a storm, not weather. People. She rose in the dim light. Early sun muted behind grey sky. The room was still warm, not just from stone and sunlight, but from bodies. The quiet hum of breath rising from where the children slept in piles, arms draped over each other like pups in a den. Clara hadn't meant to become a den mother. She hadn't meant to do much of anything besides survive this winter with her mind intact. But then came Ellis. Then came the family of 6. And then came the scarved man's tracks. 3 nights in a row, each time wider in their loops, each time closer to the edge of the glass wall. He never knocked. That she feared most of all. Clara passed through the cabin in silence, barefoot, skirt lifted to keep it from brushing against one of the children. She moved like a ghost now, lighter than she had been in life with Saul. She did not grieve him anymore, not the way she had that first year, waking up screaming his name, or hearing him speak in the groan of settling timber. Now her grief had cooled, gone from fire to stone. A thing she stood on, a thing she built with. The stovepipe wall was cold. She'd let the fire die the night before and hadn't bothered rekindling it. There was no need. The stones in the floor were still warm, their heat slow bleeding up through the rug, the clay-lined bricks, the bundle of hay tucked tight under the cot where the baby now snored softly. She knelt beside the glass wall, traced her fingers along the inner seam. No frost, no condensation, just the dry, quiet warmth of stored sunlight slowly exhaling into the room. It had taken her 3 years to understand how to build it right. The first time she'd laid windows flat, just nailed them into the logs with a crude wood frame, thinking the glass alone would be enough. It hadn't. Snow covered it fast, blocked the sun. Worse, it leaked. Cold air poured through seams, turned the cabin into a tomb. The next year, she studied the angle of the sun, made a frame of thick slanted beams to catch the low winter rays, built a short awning with bark shingles to deflect snow. She added dark stones at the base, a clay floor behind it, and stacked salvaged bricks around the edges to trap air in a box of heat. Still, it hadn't worked. Not until she dug the trench, 2 feet deep, filled with stones and sand, laid with buried clay pots. Olla jars Saul once brought from a Pueblo trader who claimed they could sweat cool in summer and keep warm in winter. Clara didn't believe it, not until she buried a jar, filled it with hot water and found it still warm 2 days later. The system became her obsession. Every part had a purpose. The stones drank heat, the jars breathed it back, the glass caught the sun, the brick slowed the bleed. The whole cabin had become a vessel, not just for her survival, but for everything she remembered about Henry, about Saul, about what it meant to keep living when others stopped. Another knock. This one wasn't soft. It didn't wait. It came hard. 4 sharp raps, then silence. Clara stood, not fast, not panicked, but with the slow finality of someone who'd already decided what they would do days ago. She moved to the door, not bothering to grab her rifle. It wasn't useful now, not with this many people in the house, not with what she expected on the other side. If it was the man in the scarf, he wouldn't come alone. She opened it, just a crack, just enough to see, and there he was. But not alone. 2 others flanked him, one young, one older. The older man looked familiar, a settler from 2 hills over, McGraw maybe, or Tanner, but the beard was too long, the eyes too hollow to be sure. The man in the scarf didn't speak, didn't smile, just held up a hand, in a strange, slow gesture. Not a threat, not peace, an offer. He pointed toward the woods, then toward the cabin, then toward his mouth. Clara stared. "You come asking," she said, voice level, quiet. "But I don't see your hands empty." The younger man behind him shifted uneasily. He held something, a bundle wrapped in a fur-lined rag. Food, maybe, or bait. The man in the scarf lowered his hand, stepped forward. Clara didn't move. "You speak or you leave," she said. He removed his scarf. The face beneath was not what she expected. No scars, no hate, just a face weathered like stone. Wide nose, long cheekbones, skin darker than hers, brown like the Pueblo traders. But his eyes were gray, pale gray, almost empty. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough but calm. "We have a child," he said. "She's burning up. Haven't eaten in 2 days." Clara let the door swing open just slightly more. The bundle. The young man stepped forward and unwrapped it halfway, revealing a girl of maybe 4 or 5, skin flushed, but lips blue. The kind of sick you don't come back from without fire and broth. Clara looked them over. No weapons drawn, no snowshoes. They'd walked here barefoot in borrowed boots. No one does that for sport. She opened the door fully. "Only for one night," she said. No one argued. Inside, the room grew crowded. Too many bodies, too many lungs. The warmth began to waver, not from cold, but from the way heat struggles to feed more mouths than it has. Energy 4. Clara adjusted the sleeping arrangements, wrapped the girl in cloth soaked with mint and willow bark, added more stones to the hearth wall, and rotated the warmed bricks into fresh hay to store. She didn't sleep that night, nor the next, but the girl began to breathe easier, and that's when it happened. The glass wall cracked, just a hairline at first, barely visible. Clara noticed it the next morning. The outer pane, struck again, probably by wind-blown debris or the pressure shift from too many people drawing warmth from the cabin's core. She didn't panic. She went outside, checked the seal, reinforced it with wax and pine tar, but the crack widened by dusk. If the outer pane failed, the warmth system would leak. The stone bank would lose its slow burn. She needed more insulation, but she couldn't block the sun, so she did the one thing she swore she wouldn't. She asked for help. Ellis returned the next day with 6 feet of oiled canvas. Ruel McGraw brought thick wool scraps, torn from an old tent, and the man in the scarf, whose name was Mateo, offered something Clara hadn't expected: knowledge. He didn't just nod, he explained. He showed her how to use mud mixed with sheep dung to seal cracks so they stayed pliable, didn't freeze, how to lay a slanting brace of wood along the inside to press against the pane without obscuring the sunlight, how to cover the inside frame at night with tightly woven matting made from grass and hide, which could be removed in the morning to let light in again. He didn't laugh, he didn't question, and by the 3rd day he began to help her improve the system. Together they dug a shallow trench beneath the cabin's front step, lined it with hot stones from the hearth, and piped the warmth up through hollowed logs into the sleeping quarters. When one child's fever spiked, Mateo suggested a sweat tent. They built one from spare wool and boiled snow inside a cauldron heated by iron. And for the first time, Clara saw something in the settler's eyes she'd never seen before. Not pity, not mockery, respect, not for her womanhood, not for her stubbornness, but for her results. They didn't understand the science, but they saw the warmth, felt it, and when the wind howled through the valley again, when other cabins reported roofs caved in, walls iced over, and one family found frozen inside their bedrolls, they remembered the woman with the glass wall, and they came not with rocks, but with silence, and need, and offerings. The final offering would not come in a sack, it would come in fire, but Clara didn't know that yet. She only knew the crack in the glass had spread, and that something worse than weather was moving through the woods. The fire wasn't inside her cabin, not yet, but Clara could see the glow through the trees, distant, low, the kind of light that didn't flicker from a lantern or gutter like a hearth. It moved slow and wrong, a haze in the tree line that left no question about what it meant. Someone was burning something big, and it wasn't for warmth. She stood in the cabin doorway just before dawn, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other holding a shawl tight against her chest. No one else was awake yet. The storm had eased overnight, but the sky still hung heavy with ice cloud and that strange weight that comes before something worse. Not a blizzard, not snow, a kind of silence that made trees stop creaking, a kind of stillness that made animals bury themselves deep. The fire pulsed again, orange-red, then gone. Clara stepped down from the porch and into snow that had crusted in the night. It didn't break under her weight. It held, slick and silent. She didn't have her boots on, just thick woolen socks tucked into her old buckskin soles. She didn't want the sound of hard heels giving her away. She passed the edge of the clearing and crouched behind a crooked pine stump, eyes squinting into the darkness. Then she saw it, smoke curling upward, not from one place, from three separate fires, spaced like signal flares, each on a ridge above the settlement gulch. She knew those ridges. One overlooked the river trail. One faced the Trappers' Road. The last sat above the shallow western pass, the one nobody used in winter, unless they were trying to avoid being seen. Clara didn't move, didn't breathe. Her fingers curled into her shawl. Her mind traced old maps Saul had drawn, crude lines in charcoal on scrap wood that marked deer paths, hidden routes, known tracks where men with ill intent might come if they didn't want a proper knock at the door. She stood slowly and turned back toward the cabin. Matteo was already awake. He stood near the glass wall, wrapped in his own blanket, staring at the floor where heat still seeped upward through clay and stone. His eyes flicked toward her, then toward the door. "You saw it?" he said. Clara nodded. "Who?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not from here," he said. "Not settlers. That meant raiders. Or worse, outlaws from across the river, those who'd been pushed from the mining towns or driven mad by starvation, the kind who didn't ask, the kind who didn't burn a fire unless they were close enough not to care who saw it. "We'll have to black the windows tonight," she said. Matteo nodded, but he didn't look at the glass wall. He looked toward the pantry, because he knew what Clara knew. They had food, not enough to last everyone till spring, not even close, but enough to survive another 2 weeks if it was just her. Maybe 10 days with Matteo, 6 if they rationed for the children, 3 if they kept the sick girl alive. But to hungry men, it might as well be a treasure trove. And it wasn't just food, it was warmth. They'd already heard the stories. Every day another traveler came, some with hollow cheeks and trembling voices, some with nothing but stories of cabins gone dark and neighbors found dead in their chairs. One boy said his father had burned the family Bible to keep the fire alive. Another claimed a man had frozen solid, standing up, axe still in hand, like a statue buried in snow. But Clara's cabin stood warm, and that made her a target. That afternoon, she convened a meeting, the first time they'd done so. Everyone sat on the floor or along the hearth wall. Matteo, the family of 6, Ellis, the McGraw brothers, and 2 newer arrivals who'd come just that morning with bleeding hands and no boots. Clara stood by the glass wall, hands folded, voice steady. "There's fire on the ridges," she said. 3 of them. No one asked what that meant. They all knew. "They're not warming themselves," Matteo added. "They're watching us." Silence. Then Ellis spoke. "We can't defend this place," he said. "Not with kids. Not with 1 rifle between us and no powder." Ruel grunted. "We could leave. Go south." Clara stared at him. "Through the pass? You'd never make it. We'll die if we stay. You'll die faster if you run." More silence. Matteo stepped forward. "We can hide the children," he said. "Move the floor bricks. Dig a space beneath." Clara blinked. He'd thought of it too. They worked all night. Under the cot, they dug a shallow pit, not wide, but deep enough for the smallest 4. They lined it with bark and wool, laid a stone jar inside for heat. Clara wove a cover from canvas and pine that looked like floorboard from above. When they finished, the hole vanished completely under the bedrolls. They turned the glass wall into a wall of shadow. Each night, they hung every scrap of cloth, every hide, every stitched panel in front of the panes, turning the once glowing room into a darkened den. The warmth dropped slightly, but not enough to freeze. The stones beneath still held heat. They extinguished the fire. Cooked only once per day, at dawn. No light at night, no movement outside. 3 more people arrived the next morning. 2 women and a boy, all frostbitten. The women had blood on their coats. "We saw what they did," the boy whispered to Clara. "They burned it all." She asked nothing more. By evening, they were 21 people, inside a cabin meant for 2. The storm lifted the next night. No snow, no wind, just bitter air and long silence. And then the fire returned. Not in the woods, not on the ridges, but in the trees behind the O'Connor place, less than a half-mile from Clara's door. They saw it in the reflection of the glass wall, a glow flickering like candlelight across the frost-covered branches. Matteo stood beside her, staring out the narrow slit between 2 heavy curtains. "It's coming," he said, and it did. The next morning, they found what was left of the O'Connor's place. Nothing but blackened beams and the smell of old wood smoke. No bodies, just ashes and tracks, boot prints. At least 7 men, 2 horses. They were methodical. They burned the home, but not the barn, stole the wood, took the iron stove, ransacked the root cellar. Clara knew the pattern. They weren't lunatics. They were planners, the kind of planners who'd seen her glass wall. They returned before midnight. Not all of them, just one. He came on foot, stood just inside the tree line. Clara saw him because she never really slept now, just rested with her hand near the axe handle and her eyes half closed. He didn't move, didn't call out, but he knew she was watching. He lifted a lantern, swung it side to side, then left. Matteo said it meant he was marking them, not warning, not bluffing, just a sign. "We know you're here." The next day, Clara made the decision. She gathered them all again. "We can't fight," she said, "and we can't run." Everyone stared. "So we'll do what they don't expect." What's that? Ellis asked. She looked toward the glass wall. We'll open the door. There were gasps, shouts, but Clara raised a hand. We let them see it, she said. The warmth, the food, the people. Are you mad? Ruel barked. They'll take it. No, she said. We trade. They thought she was insane. But Matteo understood. These men don't just want to survive, he said. They want to be better than the rest. Stronger, warmer, safer. Clara nodded. We show them how. So they did. 2 days later, the men returned. But this time, they didn't come with torches. They came with sleds full of meat, rope, tools, bartering. The man in charge, broad-shouldered, missing 2 fingers, eyes hard as glass, stepped into Clara's clearing with 10 men behind him and stared straight at the cabin. He didn't laugh. You're the one with the magic window, he said. It's not magic, Clara replied. He raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? She didn't smile. It's knowledge. That night she showed him how the floor worked, how the glass caught the sun, how the clay and stone and jars and darkness all worked together, not as fantasy, but as old knowledge, layered and patient and true. He offered her salt and smoked elk and half a wagon full of cured pine. In exchange, he asked for a map, not of the valley, of the system. Clara gave it to him, not because she trusted him, but because she knew something more dangerous than cruelty, desperation. And now perhaps curiosity could win out, but the fire still lived in the woods, and not all who watched her wall came to learn. One did not want warmth, one wanted revenge, and he was already inside. The betrayal didn't come through the door. It had been in the room the whole time. He hadn't spoken much, hadn't drawn attention, hadn't even shared a name. Just a gaunt man in a black coat and fur hat, arrived 3 nights prior with frostbitten cheeks and a limp in his left leg. He'd claimed to have come from the southern trail, said his wife died crossing the river, said he had no weapon, no food, no fire left. And Clara had believed him, not because she was foolish, because she was tired, because 21 people had come before him and not one had tried to hurt them, because the cold strips away suspicion, because kindness becomes a habit when survival depends on it. But she should have known. The first sign had been the way he watched her when she lifted the floor bricks. He hadn't asked why she hid the jars under the stones. He hadn't even pretended to be curious. He'd just stared, the same way the man with the lantern had stood in the trees, watching, waiting, measuring distance. He had a knife tucked into his boot. She'd glimpsed it once, curved, bone-handled, too clean for someone who claimed to be starving. He never sharpened it in front of anyone, never used it to cut food, Clara had told Matteo, but by then it was too late. That night the fire returned, not in the woods, not on the ridge, but in the barn. They smelled it first, smoke, sharp and oily, curling under the cabin door. Then came the knock, loud, violent. "Clara!" Ellis shouted from outside. "It's burning!" The livestock, their only cow, the sled, their tools, everything they couldn't fit inside. Clara grabbed her coat and pushed through the door into the night, heat hitting her like a slap. The barn was fully ablaze, the dry hay catching fast, the roof already buckling in the heat. "Bucket line!" someone yelled, but the well was frozen. There was no saving it. They stood helpless, faces lit by orange flame, snow reflecting the fire like blood on ice. And in that light, Clara saw the man in the black coat smile. It was brief, a twitch, but enough. She turned back toward the cabin. Too late. He was already inside. By the time she got through the door, he had the sick girl in one arm and the knife in the other. Her mother screamed, leaping forward, but he raised the blade and she stopped. "Move," he said, voice cold, "or she dies." Everyone froze. Clara stepped forward, slow. "You don't want her," she said. "She's warmth," he muttered. "They'll trade anything for her." "She's dying," Clara said. "She'll be dead in a day without this cabin." He didn't answer, just looked at the glowing wall, the jars, the stones beneath the rug, the bundled food near the hearth. "I warned them," he hissed. "I told them it wouldn't work. Told them no woman's trick could survive the real freeze. But they came here, to you, like pigs to a trough." Clara felt the weight of his hate. It wasn't personal. It wasn't even about her. It was about being wrong, about being laughed at behind closed doors, about watching your pride freeze while others stayed warm. "You burned the barn," she said. He nodded. "And now I'll burn the house. Take what I can. Leave the rest." Matteo moved from the shadows then, quiet as the storm. No words, just motion. A single rock, black, flat, still warm from the jar trench, slammed into the man's wrist, knocking the knife free. The girl dropped. Matteo caught her. The mother screamed and scrambled to pull her child away. The man lunged for the knife again. Clara got there first, and this time she did have the axe. Not raised to kill, but to block. Wood met steel, a crack, a grunt, then silence. He looked up at her, blood on his lips, rage in his eyes, and laughed. "They'll come for you," he spat. "You think this'll hold? This warmth? It's borrowed. It always runs out." "No," Clara said. Not if you know where to store it. He lunged again, and that time, she didn't block. She swung. It wasn't graceful, wasn't strong, but the blade caught his shoulder and drove him back, into the wall, where Ellis and Ruel tackled him to the floor. The knife clattered across the room. The man screamed once, then fell quiet. Mateo bound him. They didn't kill him. They didn't need to. By morning, the cabin stood silent. The barn was gone, but no one was dead, not inside. The girl's fever broke that afternoon. Clara laid her outside for a moment, wrapped in furs so the sunlight could touch her face. Just a sliver, through the one uncovered corner of glass. The rest of the wall remained hidden. They couldn't risk more fire. The man in the black coat said there were others, men who wouldn't come with sleds, men who'd already taken 3 cabins farther east, who didn't want a glass wall, just whatever it held. They let him go, not out of mercy, out of strategy. He was weak, wounded, a messenger, and when he stumbled back toward the forest, head bowed, arms bound behind him, Mateo followed, just long enough to see where he went, just long enough to know which pass he took. Then he returned, and Clara began drawing again. This time, not just a map, a guide. She used Saul's old ledger, pages worn thin, and sketched the system from memory and experience. The stone trench, the olla jars, the window angle, the layering of air pockets between fabric and clay. And then she did what no one expected. She taught it to Mateo, to Ellis, to the McGraws, to the children. Not in words, in practice. They built smaller systems, outside, dug shallow trenches in the snow, laid black rock, tilted glass from broken bottles, measured how long it took a single stone to lose its warmth in a wool wrap, wrote it down, adjusted. The cabin became not just a refuge, but a school. The woman they had mocked now taught survival. And as the snow melted, slow, reluctant, in early March, word spread. Other settlers came, not with torches, with questions. Some even offered payment, a half-cured ham, a pair of boots, salted fish. Clara refused most of it. She only asked for time. Time to show, time to build, time to pass it on. By spring, 8 cabins had glass walls, 4 had stone jars, 2 had their own trench hearths, primitive, small but functional. None burned, and no one froze. The man in the scarf returned once. He didn't knock, just left a bundle at the tree line. Inside, 3 panes of unbroken glass, and a note carved into wood. Your warmth taught them more than fire ever did. Clara placed the panes in the root cellar for next winter. The cracked wall she left as it was, not out of pride, out of memory. Because when people came and asked to see the window that saved the valley, she'd show them the line where the cold tried to come in, and failed. And when the children grew up, they told the story not of magic, but of knowledge, of a woman they once laughed at, of a wall they once mocked, of a winter they should not have survived, and the warmth that never left.